Hi, I'm Dr. Steve Feldman, curator of PromisedLandMuseum.org, the online Jewish museum of the Palestinian Experience. Welcome to this brief tour of one of my favorite of our galleries, the Creation of State Gallery. From the museum homepage, click on Galleries and then on Creation of State, pulling up our Creation of State Gallery. This gallery covers the period from 1917 through the founding of the State of Israel. The gallery describes how Israel, a state run by and for Jewish people, was formed in a land where the majority of the population at the time was primarily not Jewish. If you want to go further back, visit our Peaceful Palestine gallery. It describes Palestine before 1917. Between 1917 and 1947, acts of violence are beginning. There were Zionist terror organizations. One, for example, was the Stern Gang, a group of Zionist Jews who were trying to get the British out of Palestine because the British had been restricting Jews from entering Palestine. Jewish groups were actively trying to move Jews to Palestine at that point. A term used for this at the time was colonizers. Now, there's some question about whether colonization is an appropriate word for the effort to bring Jews to Palestine before 1947. But documents, like this one from the Jewish Colonial Trust, make clear that at least some of the people supporting colonization were thinking of it as colonization. Before 1917, Palestinian Jews, Palestinian Muslims, and Palestinian Christians were living together peacefully. After 1917, when the effort to create a Jewish state in a land with a non-Jewish majority had taken hold, that interfaith-friendly climate deteriorates. This 1945 letter to President Truman describes what could be expected to happen in Palestine that would require military force to create and maintain a Jewish state in Palestine. Already, before 1945, there was increasing violence. Eventually, hundreds of thousands of Palestinian men, women, and children became refugees. On one of my trips to visit family in Israel, I wondered how so many people became refugees. In Hebrew school, I had been taught that we came to a land of empty deserts and swamps. If that were true, how did so many people become refugees? Much of the rest of this gallery addresses that question. Father Elias Shakur is an Israeli, Arab, Christian, Palestinian pastor. While most of the exhibits in this museum come from Jewish Israeli sources, Shakur's writing is a non-Jewish source. In his book, Blood Brothers, he describes his family's personal experience of being forced from their home and not being allowed to return. Shakur's personal experience is consistent with the writing of Israeli Jewish historian Avi Shleim. Shleim's book, The Iron Wall, states that the most important reason Palestinian families left their home was because of Jewish military forces, and that these families were made refugees before any other Arab armies declared war. In the town of Deir Yassin, the Palestinian population was massacred. Zionist terrorist organizations participated. Albert Einstein was one of the people who spoke out against these organizations and labeled them terrorists. Jewish sources also document a massacre at Saf, the men, women, and children of over 400 Palestinian towns and villages were expelled. Is it possible that Israel was formed by expelling non-Jewish families from their homes? The Haganah was the Jewish colonial army that predated formation of the Israeli Defense Force. This book, The History of the Haganah, describes Haganah war plans. Plan D, written in Hebrew as Plan Dalet, called for the expulsion of entire populations of villages, the destruction of these villages, and the mining of the debris. Growing up, I was taught that we Jews encouraged Palestinian families to stay, but they fled because they were trying to speed up the killing of Jews. But that story isn't consistent with these war plans. Israeli Jewish historian Benny Morris describes a 1947 report from the Israeli Defense Force that describes specifically why Palestinian families left their homes. You can find that report at this link. The report describes the most important factors in order of importance that led Palestinian families leaving their home. According to the Israeli Defense Force, the number one reason was because the Haganah The pre-Israel Jewish army directly expelled families from their homes. The second most important factor was the indirect effect of those hostile operations on nearby Arab communities. The third most important contributor was the actions of what it terms Jewish dissidents, the Zionist terrorist organizations. Morris described the effects that these attacks had on making people leave their homes. Other reliable sources confirm how Palestinian families became refugees. Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who was assassinated by a Jewish Israeli right-wing extremist at a rally in support of the Oslo Accords, described how forces he commanded had expelled some 50,000 Palestinian men, women, and children just from the cities of Lod and Ramla alone. The full article about this was published in the New York Times and can be found at this link. This gallery ends with information about Count Folke Bernadotte. He had worked with the Swedish Red Cross and had rescued thousands of inmates out of German concentration camps, saving thousands of Jewish people. He later became a UN mediator who was assigned to deal with the 1948 crisis in Palestine. He talked about how important it was that Arab families be allowed to return to their homes. He was assassinated by a Zionist terrorist organization that had been led by Yitzhak Shamir, who later became a Prime Minister of Israel. I encourage you to check out some of the many links that we provide in this gallery. Those links will take you to more information than we could cover in this brief tour. If you're interested in learning more about what happened after 1948, you can check out our Terror and Conflicts gallery. That's the next gallery if you're visiting them in order. You can visit any of our galleries in whatever order you like. We hope you find the information presented here enlightening. You can also visit us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and rate us on Google. Thank you for taking time to tour our museum.